We have a 2-minute warning on the briefing. 2-minute warning on the briefing. Thank you.
We'll have many. Like we always have.
Has anyone ever done that? And also slightly late. I feel like everyone got to cheat today, right? This is the real win.
Yeah, it'd be helpful. Do you have any questions on it?
Okay. Couple of items for all of you at the top. As the country recovers from this once-in-a-century pandemic and economic crisis, the private businesses that make up our supply chains and get goods to businesses and the American people have struggled to keep up. We've talked about this a fair amount in this briefing room. This is not just happening here at home, but all around the world as COVID has led to shutdowns and disruptions at ports and factories around the world. In June, the White House launched the Supply Chain Disruptions Task Force to address short-term supply chain bottlenecks. And after working closely with the leaders and companies at that port on potential solutions, we announced a new port envoy to the task force in August. Solving this issue is going to require cooperation between the private sector, including rail and trucking, ports, and labor unions. And so tomorrow, the president will be meeting with the leadership of the Port of Los Angeles, the Port of Long Beach, and the International Longshore and Warehouse Union to discuss the challenges at ports across the country and actions each partner can take to address these delays. The administration will also hold a roundtable tomorrow with private sector companies, including Walmart, UPS, Home Depot, to discuss how the largest cargo owners and shipping companies can address congestion in the transportation and logistics supply chain. We'll also have a briefing later this evening with all of you and people who are not in this room right now to give you more details on any announcements for tomorrow. I also wanted to note, I had one more item. Maybe I'll get back to it at the end. It's also Jenny Leonard's birthday, so we'll just note that. Happy birthday to Jenny. There's going to be a bilateral meeting with the president of Kenya later this week. I'll get you more details after the briefing. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen.
And it's remote, obviously. Go ahead.
Is the administration going to sue Texas over the opposing the order for the vaccine mandates, and is there a risk that the OSHA efforts essentially get tied up in litigation rather than having the immediate effect?
Well, Josh, these requirements are promulgated by federal law. So when the president announced his vaccine mandates for businesses, that, of course, we're waiting on OSHA regulations for as a next step, that was pursuant to federal law and the implementation of federal law because it's an executive order. So our intention is to implement and continue to work to implement these requirements across the country, including in the states where there are attempts to oppose them. I will say, since you gave me the opportunity, Governor Abbott's executive order banning mandates, and I would also note announcement by Governor DeSantis this morning essentially banning the implementation of mandates, fit a familiar pattern that we've seen of putting politics ahead of public health. Over 700,000 American lives have been lost due to COVID-19, including more than 56,000 in Florida and over 68,000 in Texas. And every leader should be focused on supporting efforts to save lives and end the pandemic. Why would you be taking steps that prevent the saving of lives, that make it more difficult to save lives across the country or in any state? And I would also note that vaccine requirements have been standard in both the Lone Star State, Texas, in case you're not familiar, and the Sunshine State, Florida, in schools for decades, whether polio, measles, mumps, rubella, the chickenpox. There are vaccine requirements that have been implemented for decades in these states. So these decisions put these two leaders out of step with both long-time requirements, a history of vaccine mandates, but also many business leaders in their states and many businesses that are based in their states, including Disney and American Airlines. These leaders are taking steps to help boost vaccination rates, reduce deaths, reduce hospitalizations, and expand the country's labor pool. So bottom line is we're going to continue to implement the law, which the President of the United States has the ability, the authority, the legal authority to do. And we are going to continue to work to get more people vaccinated to get out of this pandemic. The President will use every lever at his disposal to do that.
And then secondly, the JOLTS report today indicated that nearly 3% of U.S. workers quit their jobs in August. That's 4.3 million people. Does the administration believe that people quitting is a positive because those people will get new jobs that pay more, or a negative because of the gravity of the Delta variant?
Well, I would say that there are different circumstances, as you know, Josh, that for different people's lives. And there are certainly, what we've seen through the pandemic, on the positive note, is that people have decided they have more choices that they can make. They have taken the period of the pandemic to maybe seek different forms of employment, different formats of that employment. Maybe some of it's remote working, maybe it's all remote working, maybe they're changing industries and career paths. And some of that, some of the numbers of people leaving their jobs is attributed to that. There are also conditions, so I can't give you the exact breakdown. I guess I'm just conveying that our economists feel that all are true. There are some conditions where women have left the workforce because of childcare needs, of the ones they can't afford, they don't have the ability to pay, and because of fears of going into companies or industries or jobs where they fear that there are not the conditions to be safe. So it depends, really, Josh. I think it's some are positive conditions and some are more because there haven't been steps put in place everywhere in every industry that can make people feel safe. Go ahead.
First, on the G20 call that the president had this morning regarding Afghanistan, the UN said on Monday that millions of dollars of aid are needed to stave off a humanitarian crisis there. I saw the EU responded by making a new commitment on that front. Did the president make any new commitments as far as what humanitarian assistance?
Well, we recently announced nearly $64 million in additional humanitarian assistance in advance of today, I should say, for the people of Afghanistan. The United States is the single largest humanitarian donor in Afghanistan, providing nearly $330 million this year alone, and we will continue to take steps to alleviate the suffering of the Afghan people and call on other donors to step up their contributions to help deliver critical assistance. So the recent $64 million brought us up to $333 and makes us far and away the largest donor.
And any change to the policy about not unfreezing the central bank assets that would be available in Afghanistan?
There hasn't been any change to that policy, no.
Okay. And then one other thing, I was wondering if you had an update on Vienna talks and kind of where that stands. I know that there's conversations today with the Israeli government. Do you see that restarting soon, and where is that now?
Well, we, of course, keep our partners abreast of our efforts to pursue a diplomatic path forward as it relates to the P5+1 talks with Iran. So certainly it was a topic of discussion. I don't have a full readout quite yet as it was happening earlier today, but in terms of where things stand, that continues to be our preferred path, our preferred choice. We believe diplomacy should always be the first option. And I think you may have all seen Secretary of State convey this weekend that time is not unlimited, and that remains the case. But we continue to pursue those negotiations. Our team remains prepared to return for another round of discussions, but I don't have an update on when those might occur. Go ahead.
In the president's view, where do the talks on the reconciliation package stand right now?
Well, as I think you heard Speaker Pelosi convey this morning as well, I mean, the president's view is that we're continuing to make progress. We're having important discussions about what a package that is smaller than $3.5 trillion would look like. Those conversations have to happen with a range of members. Those are happening both at a senior staff level and also with the president over the course of the last several days and weeks. Those will continue. Obviously, we want to get to a point, we are at a point, I should say, where there are choices that need to be made. That's the point we're at now, given there will be fewer dollars that will be spent. But a lot of those conversations are happening behind the scenes at the staff level.
And is his view, do Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema need to make a counteroffer of what they want this to look like?
It's more of an ongoing conversation than it is a passing back of dramatic paper every couple of days. So there's an ongoing discussion with Senator Sinema, Senator Manchin. There's an ongoing discussion with a range of members of Congress, range of Democrats, I should say, about what this looks like. And again, as Speaker Pelosi alluded to this morning, or said this morning, this is really the point where decisions need to be made, choices need to be made. The president's preference is the same as the speaker's preference. He proposed a $3.5 trillion package. He proposed a broad range of initiatives that will lower costs for the American people, whether it's child care, elder care, college, invest in the climate. And no matter how you cut it, though, his view is we can still do something historic, and that will fundamentally change the economy for the American people.
And there are several challenges facing the White House right now, not just getting Democrats united on the president's domestic agenda, but also skyrocketing gas prices, a bad jobs report last week. You've seen several issues, and including the president's poll numbers seem to be reflecting that. So how is he viewing all of these challenges that are facing the White House right now?
Well, he, one, has an incredible team that's working on all of these issues at one time. And his view is his responsibilities to continue to forge ahead every day and to work to address the challenges the American people are facing. You didn't mention COVID, but that continues to be on front and center on the minds of the American people. People want to return back to a version of normal. They want to go back to knowing that their kids are safe at school, that they can go to their workplaces, that they don't have to fear for their safety in communities. He understands that. That's what he's working on every single day. I would say that he also recognizes that right now, getting something done for the American people, working with members of Congress to do exactly that, to forge a path forward, to unite the Democratic Party, is what people have elected him to do, to address the challenges we're facing over the long term. So I promise you, we don't get too glum around here, even if things look challenging. Our view and his view is that he was elected to continue to press forward and address the challenges the American people are facing. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. Speaker Pelosi said in a letter last night to House colleagues that the overwhelming guidance she is getting is that members of Congress want to do fewer things well when it comes to the reconciliation package, the price tag, and what gets included. Does the president support that approach, doing fewer things well?
Well, she also gave a full press conference this morning where she addressed this, so I would point you to that. And what she said in that press conference was, if there are fewer dollars to be spent, there are choices that need to be made. And the president agrees. And that's fundamentally true, of course. If it's smaller than $3.5 trillion, which we know it will be, then there are choices that need to be made. But the president's view is that a bill that doesn't pass means nothing changes, and the challenges we're facing are too urgent to do nothing. So that's why at this point what we have to do is work with a range of members who have a range of views about what should be included in a package, what is a priority to them, so that we can make some fundamental changes. We are focused on the impact, and that's what we're keeping our eye on.
Is the White House concerned that with the House and Senate on recess right now, that talks will stall without having lawmakers in Washington?
The good news is there are phones, and we are quite used to Zoom conference calls this day and age, and those have continued through the course of weekends, through the course of nights, even as members have been away, and we anticipate those will continue at full speed over the coming days.
Just one more if I can, going back to Texas. What is the president's message to businesses in Texas? You mentioned several of them who are based there.
Yeah.
When it comes to what the federal guidance is now, and now with this state executive order, what would the president say to those companies as they're determining what they should be doing right now for their vaccine mandates?
Well, we know that federal law overrides state law. I would note that earlier when we put out our guidance on the president's announcement about mandates several weeks ago, it made clear that again, as I said earlier, requirements are promulgated pursuant to federal law and supersede any contrary state or local law or ordinance. Additionally, nothing in this guidance excuses noncompliance with any applicable state law or municipal ordinance. We put out guidance several weeks ago conveying that clearly. But fundamentally, beyond the legal aspect, which is unquestionable in our view, the question for any business leader is, what do you want to do to save more lives in your companies? How are you going to create a workforce where people feel safe to go into their workplaces? What is fundamentally in the interest of your businesses over the long term? And we've seen from economist after economist, and frankly, many business leaders who have already worked to implement mandates, that implementing these mandates creates certainty. It reduces the number of people who are out of work sick and worse. And that is good ultimately for businesses. It's good for the economy, but also saving lives is something fundamentally business leaders can do by continuing to work to implement these mandates. But I would note that a lot of these businesses are doing them on their own to date. We're still, the OSHA, in terms of the federal level, the OSHA requirements are the next step, which we expect to have soon. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. Clearly, Governor Abbott knows that federal rules supersede state rules, so why do you think he did this?
Politics.
Can you elaborate?
Well, I think it's pretty clear when you make a choice that's against all public health information and data out there, it's not based on what is in the interest of the people you are governing. It's perhaps in the interest of your own politics.
And then I know you said that there's going to be a background briefing later, but is there anything you can tell us about the stakeholders that the president is meeting with tomorrow and what the administration can do, is doing about some of these supply bottlenecks?
Sure. Well, we're taking a number of steps, which I'm happy to outline, but let me focus on the ports, because that's clearly what a focus will be tomorrow. One of the challenges we're having is, as you've all seen and shown on many of your networks and others have reported on, is the delay of goods getting through to our ports, enabling them to get to people in the country. We know that's one of the bottlenecks in the supply chain. Now, the supply chain bottlenecks range industry to industry, but we certainly know addressing those bottlenecks at ports could help address what we see in many industries across the country, and frankly are leading people who are preparing for holidays, for Christmas, whatever they may celebrate, birthdays, to order goods and get them to people's homes. So that's what he'll focus on tomorrow, is to talk about what we're going to do on ports, something that has been a focus of his for months now, and he's hired people to help address it. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. I want to follow up on an earlier question. You referenced Speaker Pelosi's press conference this morning.
Yeah.
It seemed like she somewhat backtracked from her message yesterday about what, sort of path Democrats would need to take if there are fewer dollars. It seemed like she was indicating that fewer programs done well would be the preference, but then this morning said that the first thing to go would be the timeline. So has the president given any sort of a push in either direction on this?
This is all part of the discussion, and I will let you convey or ask questions of Speaker Pelosi yourself. She's, as we saw this morning, more than capable of speaking on her own behalf. But what she was conveying is that while it was her preference, the president's preference to have the initial package proposed, what our focus now is on is building a real, tangible package that can become law and is going to make a transformational difference in people's lives. So I understand, and we all know why we're talking here about the size and the cuts, et cetera, but a cut, it's not a cut just because someone once proposed something bigger on paper. It's not a bill or a policy that's going to change lives if nothing is passed. And that's what we're working through. There's a lot of ways to do that, and that's the discussion she's having with her caucus, and the president is, of course, playing a prominent role in.
So the president doesn't prefer then one avenue or the other?
The president wants to make fundamental change in our economy, and he feels coming out of the pandemic is exactly the time to do that. And if we don't do it now, if we don't address the cost of childcare, to go back to Josh's question earlier, if we don't address the climate crisis, if we don't ensure that universal pre-K is a reality now, we're not going to have the same opportunity to do it for some time.
And I want to get to the supply chain issues. Is there any consideration of potentially lifting Trump-era tariffs to give some sort of an immediate relief to this problem? I know that the task force has been talking about long-term solutions, but that's something that some trade representatives and business leaders have suggested could have a real impact right now.
Well, the task force has actually been talking about a range of steps that need to be taken. And I think, as you saw by our announcement or our Ambassador Tai's speech last week, we are open to considering policies or continuing some policies if they are in the interests of the